My name is James Parkinson. My name is written and spoken millions of times around the world every day, and yet I have no face. When I died in 1824, I was celebrated as a great paleontologist, not as a doctor. 40 years after my death, my esteemed colleague, Professor Jean-Martin Charcot, proposed giving my name to the elusive disease that I had called trembling paralysis in my essay published in 1817 and which became known to the whole world as Parkinson's disease. But no engraving or painting of me has survived the passage of time. That's why I don't have a face. However, I am real because I am talking to you. But you may object, what am I doing here, in the year 2025, when I've been dead for 201 years? I must tell you the circumstances. Some time ago, Michael J. Fox, whose whimsical and adventurous character is well known and persists despite the worsening of his illness, my illness, I should say, decided to visit me in London in 1817, to get to know me better and to keep me up to date with what my illness was becoming in the 21st century. So he pulled the DeLorean from me back to the future out of the garage, and headed for Hoxton in 1817. Once the surprise was over, it was a wonderful meeting, and a few hours and a few pints later, we were mates like pigs. The next day, as Michael, now serious again, began to tell me about his battle against my illness, I interrupted him. Your time chariot has 2 seats. If you take me instead, I'd be able to see for myself. Won't your friends and family be worried that you won't be there? I'll tell them I'm off fossil hunting, they're used to my escapades. And here I am, at Michael's Foundation in New York. In the space of a few hours I've had to absorb 2 centuries of technical progress, and despite the genius of my brain, I'm still in shock. Knowing that I only have a week to spend in your time, I decided to concentrate on my illness and to testify using the wonderful tool you call video. I quickly realized the advantages of this technique, but needing help, I contacted Martin from Parkinson's Follies, whose humor and haircut reminded me of Doc, the inventor of the DeLorean that brought me to you. Together, we concocted a 7-day, 7-step program to analyze the Parkinson's pandemic with fresh eyes. And these new eyes, which are in fact 270 years old, mine, are going to discover what you no longer see, as you are too used to the self-destruction of humanity, which was obvious to me as soon as I landed in your era. My friend Michael invited me to spend the day with him at his foundation. There I met a lot of very nice, very competent young people. They take their work very seriously, but with a relaxed attitude that surprised me. Their working lives have nothing in common with the hard lives of the workers in my neighborhood in 1817, working in terrible conditions 60 to 80 hours a week, 6 days a week. I took the opportunity to have the history of the progress of knowledge about my disease since my little booklet of 1817 explained to me. And it was another shock for me, despite all the resources you have at your disposal these days, despite the considerable sums of money you've spent on it, you still don't know how to explain the causes of the disease, nor do you have any tests or markers to confirm your diagnoses, which you deliver the old-fashioned way, as in my day, which often leads to delays. And, worst of all, you still haven't found an effective drug to cure or simply slow the progression of my disease when it is diagnosed. For 50 years you've been using a drug whose side effects are sometimes worse than its positive effects, and other drugs that are no better. You may find my judgment a little brutal. You will discover during this week that my character is whole and that I don't hesitate to say what I think. In fact, you already know that if you've read my political pamphlets from my youth, if you've noted my constant support for the French Revolution. My friend Michael and other figures in his foundation tried to convince me that you were on the verge of fundamental discoveries that could lead to the eradication of my disease. I admitted that your role in raising private funds for research was commendable, and that the competence and sincerity of the research teams were not in question. But there's one point on which I stand firm: the fight against the pandemic depends first and foremost on eliminating the causes. I'm afraid it's impossible to repair the brain, so we have to do everything we can to prevent it from being damaged. I'm now in a hurry to see what my neighborhood of Hoxton in London has become. I'm going there tonight with Martin in the DeLorean from Back to the Future, whose instant space travel properties we're using in addition to time travel. I'm afraid I won't be able to fall asleep, overwhelmed as I am by everything I've discovered about the evolution of humanity over the last 200 years. See you tomorrow morning from Hoxton for the second day of our extraordinary adventure. The sun rises over London in a clear, cloudless sky. Your efforts to reduce air pollution have been effective. In my time, coal, the main fuel of our industrial revolution, created a permanent fog over the city, responsible for many respiratory illnesses in exposed populations. I have learned, however, that in order to achieve these results, you have exported the pollution to other countries, in particular China, which I will be visiting tomorrow. Yet another example of the hypocrisy of your world and your blindness. Today, I'm going to take the bus and the metro and also walk on my own 2 feet, and try to understand a little how you opened the door to an explosion of my illness. Tonight, I'm totally despondent. And it's not due to the time difference with New York or the age difference with 1817. I've just read that over the last few decades my disease has increased by an estimated 274% between 1990 and 2021. The number of people affected worldwide has risen from 3.15 to 11.8 million. By 2050, the number of sufferers is expected to reach 25.2 million, an increase of 112% compared with 2021. When I described the 6 cases I had observed, I could never have imagined that there would be 25 million 2 centuries later. As a doctor in a working-class neighborhood, I try to help women, men, and children who are suffering from malnutrition, air pollution, the cold and exhaustion at work. I find it hard to accept that, with all the advances in technology and knowledge, you remain powerless and almost inactive in the face of this explosion in Parkinson's disease, since it has to be called by its name. In reality, I'm afraid it's much worse than impotence or indifference, but rather responsibility or complicity. The thousands of synthetic molecules that you have manufactured and thrown carelessly into the environment as pesticides, solvents, additives, colorings, medicines, insulators, paints, lubricants, fuels, various excipients and a host of other uses have made the environment dangerous and toxic. The explosion in cancer and neurodegenerative diseases is a direct consequence. The powerful lobbies of industrial agriculture and the agri-food industry are perpetuating the poisoning of food, water, and even schoolyards, while destroying biodiversity. I was astonished to learn that insect populations in Europe have fallen by 80% in 30 years. What would we hear if it were insects that had destroyed 80% of human populations? Insects are a laughing matter, but viruses and bacteria are less certain. Not long ago, with COVID, you feared a replay of past episodes of the Black Death. In the fields of industry and energy, things seem to be no better. But I need to study this in more detail, which is what I'm going to do tonight, when we're in Shanghai. I don't speak a word of Chinese, but I hope that my name is known in the Empire of the Rising Sun and that we won't be stopped on our arrival by the DeLorean, which is very practical but lacks discretion. Let's get going, Marty. Sorry, Martin. Let's not dilly-dally. We're about to lose 7 hours of jet lag, so it's going to be a short night. We landed in an old quarter of Shanghai, and all went well. The locals welcomed us like princes, offering us board and lodging, and we spent the rest of the night recounting our lives in the universal language of humanity, hospitality. This morning I have a meeting at the offices of the Ministry of Health, which Michael arranged for me. We're going to travel to modern Shanghai by public transport. I'll tell you all about my thoughts and new discoveries this evening. What a day, my friends! Shanghai is an incredible city for someone from the 1800s. I'd already been overwhelmed by my exploration of London, but I found familiar buildings almost everywhere. In New York, I mainly saw the city from the windows of the Michael Foundation. But here, in Shanghai, I have a better understanding of what crazy economic growth implies. And I have confirmation that humanity does not learn from its mistakes. I got the impression that China's so-called economic development has reproduced 2 centuries after the first industrial revolution that I experienced in London in 1817. Only worse. Everything is blown out of proportion here: the destruction, the construction, the pollution, the addictions, the traffic, the connections, the degradation, the embezzlement, and a whole host of other ion words, except revolution, an idea that the powers that be have abandoned. My meeting with the senior officials at the Ministry of Health was confusing. They were not surprised to see me arrive from the past. I had access to all the documents available on Parkinson's disease, and it was no surprise that my intuition was confirmed. The growth curves for Parkinson's disease are breaking all records, and the same is true for the progression of other neurodegenerative diseases and cancers. So much so that it is estimated that more than half the people in the world suffering from Parkinson's disease are in China. Multinational health companies are on the lookout for this juicy market and are making no secret of it. Tonight, I'm feeling a bit out of sorts and a bit down in the dumps as I discover that humanity is ready for self-destruction. It took some diplomacy on Martin's part to convince me to finish my week-long journey into my future. Tonight, he's taking me to his home in Set, a singular peninsula, he tells me, where we'll sleep on a deserted beach, lulled by the sound of the waves. Tomorrow belongs to us. We'll discuss what it's like to live with my illness in 2025. Let's get going. We wake up at sunrise, after a restful night, thanks to the sound of the waves. Before we attract any attention, we need to find a safe, free, and authorized parking space. Martin has a brilliant idea: why not set up in an unoccupied corner of the underground car park currently under construction, which a citizens' movement has been opposing for 3 years? We'd be the first to use it, as we wouldn't need a ramp to get down, a ramp that isn't planned in the current project. While visiting Set, Martin tells me what it's like to live with this disease. And I discovered an entire continent that I'd never seen before. The image of the iceberg, which is often used, seems to me to be a judicious one. Because, you see, although posterity has named me the discoverer of the disease, and Professor Charcot proposed my name to designate it, I am in fact virtually ignorant of most of the symptoms that you, the sufferers, experience painfully on a daily basis. My only merit was to recognize and describe 2 of the 3 symptoms that history will use to diagnose the disease: tremor at rest, rigidity, and its consequence, walking bent over, which leads me to speak of agitating paralysis. I did not specifically mention slowness. Furthermore, I wrote that the mental faculties are not altered, which is only true in the early stages. Despite his illness, Martin was very voluble and very clear. Tonight, I think I've caught up a little. And I'm stunned. This disease is a real bastard, and I understand better the violent words used to describe it on social networks, in literature, and in discussion groups. Charcot didn't exactly give me a gift. Parkinson's is a nice name, but it's a horror. I understand that Parkinson's disease is not primarily a disorder of disordered movement, but first and foremost a neuropsychiatric disease caused by the loss of neurons in several areas of the brain, mainly the substantia nigra and dopaminergic neurons, but not exclusively. These imbalances between neurotransmitters affect movement, but also taste, sensitivity to pain, smell and vision, and more generally the psychological balance of the person affected. Depression is very common. The side effects of prolonged use of levodopa, dyskinesias, off-on fluctuations, etc., and the risk of addiction linked to dopaminergic agonists are consequences that I am discovering. The shock of the diagnosis is a subject that concerns me as a humanist doctor. The issue of the right to die with dignity as applied to neurodegenerative diseases is also of great concern to me, a subject that Martin courageously exposed in episode 59 of his Parkinson's Follies on YouTube, with a position that I support. With his Parkinson's Follies, which now has 60 episodes, Martin is doing a remarkable job explaining what patients have to say to help other patients, but also for everyone, to make society aware of the urgent and essential choices that need to be made to slow the spread of the pandemic. Some are even more optimistic and envisage the possible eradication of the pandemic. These include the authors of the book Ending Parkinson's Disease, A Prescription for Action. Tomorrow we will be meeting one of them, Professor Bas Bloem, at his home in Holland. I can't wait to meet him because, having seen him on a few videos, I have a feeling we're going to get on really well. We head down into the hole to find our DeLorean. It seems that we haven't gone incognito. So much the better if it helps the opponents of Banks Publics to win their case. Off to Holland. Martin has promised me an arrival under a windmill and near a field of tulips. We slept under the wings of an old mill. Thank you, Martin, for indulging the whims of a twisted old man. And off we went to Nijmegen, where you'll find the Radboud University and its medical center, where Professor Bas Bloem spent most of his career. We leave the DeLorean in a corner of the campus and I head off to find Professor Bloem. We'll meet again this evening for a report on the day. This week in my future, which is your present, will surely leave its mark on the rest of my life. Meeting Michael J. Fox, first at my home in Hoxton in 1817, when less than a week ago Michael reenacted a Back to the Future just to come and meet me, and then in New York at his foundation, was the most powerful experience of my life, and there have been others. I will be eternally grateful to him. Today's meeting with Professor Bloem will remain another high point in my life and may well change its course. This man who has devoted his entire life, with staggering energy, to fighting the disease that bears, alas, I began to think, my name, welcomed me with incredible emotion and simple, very touching words. Not for a second did he seem troubled by the fact that I had traveled through time. We took a tour of everything he has tried in his life, and often succeeded in, to improve the living conditions of people with Parkinson's disease. We discussed his successes and failures in convincing the world's politicians that we must act quickly and forcefully. We talked about ourselves, our lives and the role of doctors in society. He asked me about my work with the poorest people in my neighborhood, and about my role in improving institutional care for the mentally ill. We talked about the French Revolution, human rights, and popular education. We talked about temporary discouragement and how to overcome it. We talked about the loneliness of whistleblowers and the power of collective action. Professor Bas Bloem has published hundreds of scientific articles, given hundreds of lectures at conferences, in universities, and on the internet, and has replied to thousands of journalists from newspapers, radio, and television, and many more. All this in addition to his work as a carer, teacher, and university researcher. I've watched dozens of these videos. Bas Bloem never backs down from his convictions. Martin, more pragmatic, asks me to choose 1 or 2 minutes of a video for our report of the day. I choose these 56 seconds, recorded as he answers questions from internet users following an internet conference he has just given entitled Environmental Pollutants and Parkinson's for the Parkinson Society of British Columbia, Canada, in 2022. What I hear there is a cry from the heart, a heart-rending appeal in the face of inaction.
Probably is, the longer you look at it, it is actually stunning what we are doing to ourselves. Heart disease, Alzheimer's disease, Parkinson's disease. Many of these diseases are man-made, and I think it really is a call to action. I've called the Parkinson's disease a canary in the mine. You know, the mine workers in the old days used to have a canary, the bird, to screen for toxicity. And if the canary stopped singing, then the air was toxic and you needed to get out of the mine as quickly as possible. So it was an early warning sign. And I think Parkinson's is just the tip of the iceberg. It's a visible, recognizable condition, but it's not the only disease linked to the environment. And I really think we should act, and we should act quickly.
We'll be thinking about all this again tonight, when we spend the night in Nuuk, Greenland, the last stop on my journey into my future. I'll be leaving tomorrow evening with Michael, who'll be joining us there. Here we are, the three of us together again, in a cafe in Nuuk. Just 5 days ago, we chose Greenland to end our adventure. For each of us, Greenland could represent nature's last refuge from the human encroachment on its rich ecosystems. In 1817, when I return this evening, this is still true. In 2025, it is no longer the case. Throughout this last day, during our excursions, Michael and Martin have informed me of the mortal perils that threaten this immense territory. The melting of Greenland's glacier is accelerating. Greenland's immense ice cap has lost 4,700 billion tons in the space of 20 years, contributing to a 1.2 centimeter rise in the oceans alone. The ecosystem is in upheaval and many animal and plant species are threatened in the very short term. The emblematic polar bear will soon no longer have enough territory to survive. Traditional Inuit ways of life are under threat in all areas: hunting, fishing, transport, habitat. Oil and uranium mining have been banned since 2011. However, following the legislative elections in 2021, a mining project to exploit rare earths is back on the agenda, led by an Australian company with Chinese capital. Donald Trump, the democratically elected President of the United States, persists in his desire to annex Greenland unilaterally in order to seize its wealth, which he intends to exploit.
We need Greenland for national security purposes. You have China ships all over the place. You have Russian ships all over the place. We're not letting that happen.
As for Parkinson's disease, one might have hoped that the absence of heavy industry would have spared Greenland, and particularly the indigenous Inuit populations, from the disease. However, this is not the case. A recent study showed that the incidence of Parkinson's disease was twice as high among the Inuit of Greenland compared with the population of the Danish island of Ulls. Organochlorine pesticides are the prime suspect. With my return to the past just a few minutes away, it's time for an initial assessment. I, the still faceless James Parkinson, am happy to have lived for a week in 2025. My scientific mind has been gorged with information that it will gradually process. Knowing the future has always been a human dream, and I feel the gravity of the experience made possible by Michael J. Fox. However, another part of me is sad and troubled. I lived my youth with the dreams of the encyclopedists Diderot and D'Alembert, fueled by the conviction that the progress of knowledge would bring happiness to humanity. Sadly, that's not what I've seen 200 years on, and not just in the field of fucking Parkinson's disease. What I've experienced this week is so powerful that I'm afraid I can't go on living as I did before, as if I didn't know. Come on, Michael, let's not dawdle any longer. The shortest goodbyes are the best. If the DeLorean's ready, let's get out of here. Martin, who's not traveling this time, will be able to film our departure. Farewell. And thanks again for everything.